Good morning, guys. And today I want us to talk about the impacts of poor urban planning on climate change in cities. My name is Jackson Kinyanjui, a PhD scholar in agroclimatology, the founder of Climate Change Kenya, and also the current Youth Environmental Award winner in Nakuru County. And I also serve in two capacities as the Climate Ambassador of Kenya under the World Bank Group, and also I'm the current Climate Reality Leader 2020. And to begin us off, I want us to talk about the impacts of poor urban planning on climate change in cities. The main reason why I wanted us to look into this phase and chapter is that climate change is an issue, and according to the UN projections, it was estimated that 2020 is the best year for us to start reductions that is going into, towards the low carbon emissions, and for us to attain the 1.5 degrees centigrade that is actually being sought after. But for us to achieve that goal, we must reduce our greenhouse gases emissions by 7.6% every year for the next 10 years, because our target is 2030. Poor urban planning is a problem that has been facing many African countries and nations, and even most of the developing and even others which are developed countries in the world. Our main focus today will be looking into urban planning. Is it one of the main contributors to climate change? Yes, it is. I will support that fact by giving you statistics as to why that is a reality. Before I go into the meat of this discussion, let me start off by giving you some of the learning objectives. The learning objectives, by the end of this presentation, you will be in a better position to describe climate changes and its effects in totality, that is, from the world perspective, going into continental-wise, and finally into country-wise. Be it your country or any other country, the same effects and changes can be applied. Number two, we are going to be the learning objectives. The second one will be to describe the transformative role that cities can play in achieving green and climate resilient development. The third one will be explain how urban areas are affected and contribute to climate change. The fourth one will be you'll be able to explain how climate change adaptation and mitigation can be considered in urban planning. And lastly, you'll be in a better position to identify specific adaptation and mitigation measures suitable for urban areas. To begin off, I'll approach this topic of poor urban planning and its impact on climate change in a four-tier approach. The first one will be climate change problems. Which are these problems that we are actually experiencing, so that it can give that climate denier that push towards effecting and realizing that climate change is real and we need to do something about it. The second one will be the effects of poor urban planning to cities. The third one will be poor urban planning agents of climate change. And lastly, it will be climate resilience and solutions for urban cities. So welcome, as I start off now with the first one, which is climate change problems. What are these climate change problems that we have been experiencing, or you have been experiencing, but you never realized that it was a climate change problem? The first one is sea level rise. Sea level rise has been a problem, and it will continue being a problem as long as the greenhouse gases are increasing and the temperatures are increasing, and you are not able to attain or to maintain the 1.5 degrees centigrade that we all hope to maintain. As we move on, we'll be able to see that the global sea level has risen by about 8 inches since reliable record keeping began in 1880. It is projected to rise another 1 to 8 feet by 2100. This is the result of added water from melting land ice and expansion of seawater as it warms. And this will put low-lying islands and cities at risk. And as you can see from the presentation, 2050 sea level and 2030 sea level, and where the people are at the background taking a swim at the beach, it tells you all that will be submerged under the sea. But there is a solution. So this one, we can avoid it as long as we implement certain measures. Sea level rise and population impact. It is estimated, according to the Climate Central, that a sea level rise of 6.6, that is by 2100, it will ultimately affect 7.8 million people worldwide. And a sea level increase of 0.7 will have an impact of 1.3 million people being affected. Who are these people? The lowest projection shows that the people will be mostly affected are the vulnerable communities. This ones I'm talking about the children, I'm talking about the elderly, and I'm talking about the women. And if you're living in a low-lying island, be it close to a beach, then there's time for you to reconsider this. Buying a land or a place near the sea, and yet the sea level is rising, and to compound that fact, you're a climate denier, then I have bad news for you. That property will be submerged and it will be reclaimed back by the sea. But this one can change. Melting of ice is the other effect of climate change. The ice sheets contain enormous quantities of frozen water. If the green ice sheet melted, scientists estimate that sea level would rise about 6 meters, that is 20 feet. If the Antarctica ice sheet melted, sea level would rise by about 60 meters. This is outstanding. This is astonishing. It tells you that it will exacerbate the effects of climate change. And from the background, you can be able to see what's happening. The ice, the blue ice, as they call it, is breaking away. And this one reduces the surface area. It reduces the surface area that was there initially, that could have helped in what we call the albedo effect, reflecting back the sun's radiation back and cooling the earth. But with this ice having broken off and forming part of the sea, then expect sea level rise to occur, and you expect the temperatures on the earth's surface to increase. These are few evidences of glaciers that have melted over the years. For those who believe climate change is not real, have a look at this. The Muir and Riggs glaciers. In 1941, you can see below there that it was actually a full glacier. But in 2004, there is a sea formed in that place. This is what has contributed to the sea level rise. The other one is Pedersen Glacier. The same scenario you can see there. In 1920, it was ice. In 2005, it has melted and land has taken over. And let me tell you something, when the ice melts, be it Bear Glacier in Alaska, 1920 and 2005, forming that sea that you see there, the melting leads to the release of gases which have been hiding or which have been contained within that ice sheet for a long time. I'm talking about methane, which is more potent than carbon. It is said that it is 40 times potent than carbon. We have the McCarthy Glacier in Alaska. In 1909, you can see from the background, there was a full glacier, an ice sheet that was there. Everything was okay. But now you can see there is a sea formed in that area. There's a lake formed in that area due to that melting. Northwest Glacier is the same scenario. In 1909 and in 2005, there is a huge difference. So climate change is happening, This is back home in Kilimanjaro in Africa, and you can see there's a huge difference between 1993 and 2000. In 1993, you could see there were some ice glaciers on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but in 2000, there isn't. It has declined. Telling you that now we are in 2020, and this was in 2000, then there's a huge possibility that there is no glacier on that mountain. Greenland has been losing about 280 gigatons of ice per year on average. And Antarctica has lost almost 120 gigatons a year, with indications that both melt rates are increasing. To give you a glimpse of what I mean by 280 gigatons and 120 gigatons in Antarctica, 1 gigaton of water would fill about 400,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 400,000. Take time to observe that. Each gigaton represents 1 billion tons of water. 1 billion tons of water. The rising temperatures as the third effect of climate change. The world has been getting warmer. Annual mean temperatures above or below average. Let me adjust my sound. I just got somebody saying that the sound in the background is making them not to hear. But to give you a reality of what is happening is that I think that will be fine. Yes, as I was saying earlier, is that the annual land temperature above or below average has been increasing. If you look at 1800 to 2000, it tells you that the temperature has been increasing. This has occurred during or after the Second World War, that is during the Industrial Revolution, the first and the second Industrial Revolution, the temperatures started escalating. Man finally invented how to use the motorbike, the vehicles. Man eventually discovered how to use fossil fuels, and which are some of the greatest contributors to greenhouse gases. So development has an expense. A rise of just 2 degrees Celsius, let me just give you a bigger picture of what I mean by that. A rise of just 2 degrees Celsius in global warming could make over a quarter of the world's land to become drier and more desert-like, increasing the threat of widespread drought and wildfires. New research led by one of the Indian origin has found that this is something that is happening. It has been quantified to be as a result of climate change. In Eastern Africa, we have been experiencing these droughts day in, year out. This is as a result of the increasing surface temperatures compounded by the greenhouse gases, which we, who are not the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, are feeling the pinch. And the worst part about climate change is that the ones who are least polluting it are the ones who are most affected. We are the most vulnerable in Africa. And yet, the Western countries are the ones who are emitting the most. In Eastern Africa, the arid and semi-arid areas, the pastoralists have been feeling the pinch. That farmer from the background is looking at his animals, of which it has died. And remember, they only rely on these animals for sustenance. Australia is the same. It was ravaged by drought last year. Heat wave, these ones occur as a result of this increase in surface temperatures. In France, they have experienced one of the worst heat waves. That was in 2019. The summer heat waves caused 1,500 extra deaths in France. The minister confirms that the top temperature in France in summer of 2019 was 46 degrees Celsius. Yes, this one you cannot compare it to what we experienced this year in Death Valley in USA. The highest temperature recorded, or the second highest temperature recorded on Earth, it was clocking at around 56 degrees Celsius. And the first, if you may ask, where was it recorded? It's the same place. Telling you that 2020, we must pull up our socks and gear up for the worst if we don't implement these measures. We are in a climate crisis era. France, the same. You can see somebody there at the background is lying, trying to cool off themselves. And in France, memories of a deadly 2003 heat wave that killed 15,000 people in the country left much of Europe sweltering. Still loom large. Around the country, fans and air conditioners flew off the shelves. We're going to talk more about the air conditioners and what impact they have on the greenhouse gases. In Spain in 2019, the National Weather Agency issued warnings for several parts of the country, with temperatures expected to climb by the weekend of that summer of 2019 to above 40 degrees Celsius, or more than 104 degrees Fahrenheit in Madrid and other island areas. In Egypt, it was the same. In 2005, they recorded high temperatures of 46 degrees centigrade. Germany, it was the same, high temperatures. And what do these high temperatures bring to the table? The effect of that is that changes in precipitation, monsoon flooding in Mumbai in 2019, it occurred. In 2017, flooding is the most prevalent disaster in North Africa. The second most common in East and South and Central Africa, and the third most common in West Africa. To my viewers, I hope the sound is okay. Please do comment on the chat whether the sound is okay so that I can adjust it or continue the way I am. Thank you for that. In 2019, the same scenario was experienced in Kenya, floods occurring, and this year also we have seen unprecedented floods and leading to water levels increasing in the lakes found within the Rift Valley. So this is one effect of increase in temperature in one area leading to precipitation patterns increasing in another area. We are within a closed hydrological system. The whole world is within a hydrological system. What happens in one end, we feel it as a ripple effect on the other end. In 2020, this year, the same scenario, we have seen it. Kenyans living in Western, Central, Rift Valley, and coastal regions have been warned to brace for heavy rainfall. Hurricanes, that's another problem that has been occurring due to climate change. As much as we don't experience it here in Africa, it is a problem worldwide. Intensity, frequency, and duration of North Atlantic hurricanes, as well as the frequency of the strongest Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, have all increased since the early 1980s. Why do we need to go back to the 1980s? This one signifies the period whereby we didn't have these measures of reducing our carbon emissions. But the recent research studies have shown that countries are embracing clean energy, countries are embracing low carbon emission economies, and this is a positive trend. The rising strength of North Atlantic hurricanes is a worrying trend. Over the years, you can see it has been increasing, as I had explained earlier. In USA, the worst one, the Hurricane Katrina, was a large Category 5, which caused over 1,800 deaths and a cost of $125 billion to the economy. So this one tells you that if we don't plan, if we don't climate proof our cities, then we are in for an economic shock. Effects of poor urban planning, our second tier. What are these effects of poor urban planning? The effects of poor urban planning range from displacement of people, infrastructure being destroyed, the health of people being affected, food and water security, economic development, ecosystems, and social breakdowns. I'll talk about that in detail. The first one is the statistics that you need to have with you. 60% of the world's population live in urban areas. That's an estimation that will be happening by 2030. 60% of the world population. Putting in mind the world population as up to now is 7.8 billion. By 2030, it will have clocked around 8 to 9 billion. 60% of that 8 billion will be living in urban cities. 70% of the world's urban population was living in developing countries in 2010. So in developing countries, we're leading. As much as we are saying 60% of the world's population will be living in urban cities, in Africa, it will have clocked up to 80% or 90%. Because in Africa, we have compounding challenges as from unemployment, no job opportunities. So yes, we move to urban cities for employment. This one calls for African nations to do something when it comes to decentralizing their services to other towns so that rural to urban migration is reduced. The first one is ecosystems. Ecosystems is one of the areas that will be affected within a city. Climate change impacts on ecosystems and the important services they provide, which include oxygen production and protection from flooding. Climate change will reduce biodiversity and wetland areas and lead to loss of trees and soil, among other effects. Ecosystems are already often affected by human activities such as urbanization, deforestation, and introduction of invasive species. Poor and vulnerable communities, that is the children, the women, and the elderly, are often relying on most of these ecosystems and services, and they are likely to be most affected by the impacts of climate change. Number 2, economic development. Climate change will have many impacts on economic development. There will be effects on industry through damage to buildings, infrastructure, and other assets. Industry can also be impacted by the effects of climate change on city infrastructure and transport networks, which can cause delays and increase costs. Climate change will also affect tourism. In some countries, through changing temperatures, disruptions of transport networks, and sea level rise in coastal areas, for instance, in island countries. In addition, climate change will impact on the livelihoods of urban residents through affecting such means of production as social relations and natural resources. Food and water security. This will be another area that will be affected. Climate change will result in reduction of food production in some countries through changes in precipitation patterns. Water resources will be impacted by factors such as increased demand and reduced groundwater recharge. We'll be talking more about groundwater recharge and what we need to do when we are planning our urban cities. Health-wise, climate change can and will affect human health negatively if our urban cities are not climate-proofed. Diseases such as malaria, cholera will be more prominent in these areas. And remember, in Africa, we have said 70% of the population lives in urban cities, and most of them live in the rural settlements within the cities. 40% of them live in these rural settlements within the cities. Infrastructure will be the other area or sector that will be affected by climate change within the urban cities. Cities depend on different types of infrastructure, such as power, water, waste removal. For instance, salt water intrusion can affect the quality of water supplies. Water supply infrastructure will also need to cope and to be climate proofed against such problems. Precipitation patterns can increase or decrease water supplies depending on location. We'll be talking more about location. Displacement of people, climate refugees. This will be something that will be on a rise due to climate associated phenomena. Climate change impacts may also lead to displacement of people and therefore increase internal and international migration. Social aspects, that is, as I said earlier, the most vulnerable people in the community will be affected. It will affect the family setup. It will affect the community setup if something is not done. Which are these agents of poor urban planning as the third tier I'll be looking into? Poor urban planning agents of climate change. The first one is energy. The first one is transport sector, the energy sector, the household or commercial or residential sector, and finally the industrial sector. These four areas contribute to greenhouse gases, and these are the four areas that we need to climate proof so that they head towards green energy, which is clean energy, and towards a low carbon emission. The first one is the energy sector. Urban cities are reliant, or they rely so much on energy. And which is the cheapest source of energy they have at their hands is fossil fuels. This one continues to be the main fuel used for generating electricity. The choice of fuel greatly affects the level of emissions in cities, in addition to the actual amount of emissions generated. The other sector will be the transport sector. And the transport sector, together with the home and commercial sector, this one form the largest percentage of greenhouse gases emitters as opposed to the others. The level of emissions from transport are related to all types of transport modes, be it by railway, by road, by air. And we need to urge our governments to go the direction of green energy, the use of electrically fueled cars, and the increase of bicycle lanes and walking pedestrian lanes. And also we need to encourage the use of BRT, the bus rapid transport system, as opposed to the use of individual cars, and encourage carpooling as opposed to this kind of menace we're seeing here. Industrial sector is another area. Energy intensive industrial activities within cities particularly contribute to emissions. Cities that have or are categorized as industrial cities, they are the hotspots when it comes to emission of carbon and greenhouse gases. Level of emissions are also linked to technologies used for production, with cleaner technologies or energy efficiency measures having the potential to reduce emissions. The other area is the housing sector. In the housing sector, especially in European countries and the West, they rely so much on cooling and heating machines. I'm talking about the air conditioners. During winter, these machines fly off the shelf. And these are one area that increases the carbon emissions. How does it do that? It puts stress on the energy sector. Remembering that energy sector, most of them, they use fossil fuels or they are diesel powered. So this one compounds the problem of greenhouse gases emissions. And what are cities doing to reduce the use of these air conditioners? We'll be talking about that in the adaptation segment. Factors influencing emission levels to vary from city to city. What makes the carbon emissions to vary from one city to the other? The first one is demography, or the composition of a society. Societies that have a large population being comprised of the elderly and the aging, they are less dependent on these energy sources. The young, they use energy the most, be it in the day-to-day use, as opposed to the elderly. So a nation that is comprised mostly of the young, the energy consumption is higher, as research has showed it. And so something needs to be done. In Africa, or most of the developing countries, the demography is wider at the base and narrow at the apex. The youth are more. In Europe and in the West, the base is narrower while the apex is wider. They have more of the elderly. That one is self-explanatory. Number two is location. Location determines the carbon emissions from city to city to vary. Certain areas are located in places where it's cold, they need heating systems. Certain areas are located in areas which are hot, they need cooling systems. So the location of an area determines the energy use of that city. Types of economic activities being carried within the city is another area. The types of economic activities undertaken will determine the kind of emissions that will be emitted by that city. From industrial activities, from mining, all these activities, the more you have, the likely you'll be emitting more carbon emissions than your next door city or neighbor. Urban structure. We have different urban structures, and urban sprawl has been the biggest problem. People building anyhowly without any format, circumventing the laws. Urban sprawl leads to services such as transport expanding to reach these masses. And this one leads to greenhouse gases being emitted more. From the scenario you see, we have different kind of urban structures, high density to high-rise buildings to perimeter block kind of development pattern. So we need to have a synchronized kind of urban planning structure being enforced by our urban planners, our architects, our government agencies, so that we can streamline and reduce the carbon emissions. Climate resilience and solutions. Which are some of these solutions we can be able to put into place so that our urban cities can become climate proofed? The transport sector is one area we need to look into. This is a picture of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. They have this bus rapid transport system. In Rwanda, they have another one which is working wonders. As long as it is organized, as long as it has a framework that is well managed, then it can work. This type of plan improves infrastructure and connections related to transport. Mainstreaming climate change can mean, for example, identifying the potential climate change impacts on transport networks and improvements that are needed. With this kind of system, you're able to monitor the greenhouse gas emissions being emitted on a daily basis. Improvements that are needed include undertaking climate change mitigation efforts, such as reducing emissions through supporting public transport. Yes, this is another way of improving the transport sector or the public transport by creating bicycle lanes and walking lanes for people. In Sweden, almost 70 to 80% of the population use bicycles. And it makes sense to allocate a huge percentage of that road transport network to the bicycle and the walking lanes. It does not make sense for you to allocate 80% of the road transport network to vehicles and allocate 20% to bicycles and walking lanes. It should be the vice versa. Cities should aim at increasing the bicycle lanes and their walking lanes as opposed to increasing their vehicle or automobile vehicle lanes. This is another case scenario of how the bus rapid transport system has worked wonders in Rio de Janeiro. As a result, the launching of the Clean Bus Declaration, it committed itself, Rio de Janeiro, it committed itself to 20% of the city bus fleet being converted to clean technology by 2020, and 50% of the bus fleet converted to clean technologies by 2025. And with clean energy, it comes jobs. So clean energy does not mean anybody will lose their jobs. It means that more jobs will be created. In fact, right now, some of the careers that will be on high demand are: one, solar panel installation and repair, the green energy, the geothermal, all these kind of careers that are headed towards clean energy are the careers that will be on market in the near future. Number two, town and city plan. This is an area we need to look into. This plan identifies different zones for different types of development, such as commercial or housing. Climate change can be mainstream in different ways. We need to take our cities like our body systems. You take in garbage out. You take in clean, you remove clean. So we need to create this system that is working like our arteries and veins within our body system to ensure the flow of air in and out our building structures, to ensure water infiltrates into the ground, as opposed to building cabro or cemented pathways that reduce the groundwater recharge. We need to have porous pathways to increase the groundwater recharge. This is an example of a pathway that has the capability of increasing the groundwater recharge. It is porous, ensuring the water circulates into the ground. This is one area we need to put more effort into, especially to the planners and the architects. Make sure you have this in mind. Make sure you have the green energy scenario in your mind so that everything can work in synergy. This is an example of greening our building, helps to reduce urban heat island effect and also improve groundwater recharge. It also helps to dampen the noise pollution and increase carbon sinks. This structure, you can see it has solar panels, it has vegetation, thereby increasing our carbon sinks. The health aspect is improved in the city. People are able to breathe better, clean air, and we need more green spaces in our cities. Public health plan. This is one area we need to invest more to climate-proof our cities. It focuses on disease prevention and public safety improvements, Mainstreaming climate change into this type of plan could include identifying health risks related to climate change and facilitating mitigation or mitigating those kind of calamities. We need to have that synergy. A good example of this public health, these are the foods we eat. And the reason why we need to shift to becoming vegetarians is that mutton produces around 40 kg of carbon dioxide, equivalent to, as from the key you can see, a kg of carbon dioxide is equivalent to a kg of food consumed. So if you consume 40 kg of mutton, it's the same as 40 kg of carbon being emitted that went into that 40 kg of meat to be produced. Beef, cheese, pork, and finally you can see when you come to the vegetables, we have rice, only emitting less. That is, a 4 kg rice emits 4 kg of carbon. Nuts, broccoli, and tomatoes. And remember, when the demand of meat is high, then it leads to the rearing and the keeping of animals in large numbers. And these animals emit methane. And methane, as I said earlier, is 40 times potent than carbon. Have that in your picture. The other area we need to look into as we climate proof our cities is the energy management plan. We said cities are energy dependent. We need to shift from the fossil fuel kind of cities to the green energy, low carbon economy kind of cities. The energy sources range from solar, from the sun or the solar radiation. We have wind, we have water, that is the hydro. And even other countries are even using nuclear. This plan improves energy generation options, distribution, and conservation. Mainstreaming climate change into this plan could involve identifying risk to energy generation and distribution facilities, and supporting climate change mitigation, for instance, through energy efficiency measures. A case study here in Changwon, as a result of participating in the Carbon 40 network and learning from other cities who have implemented cool roofing programs, Changwon has developed a pilot program to subsidize cool roofs, thereby saving a lot on consumption of electric energy and channeling that money that could have been used on electricity being fueled by other sources of energy into the economy. This is a scenario we see also in Jordan and Cyprus. In Jordan, approximately 12% of dwellings use solar water heating. According to estimations made in Jordan, solar water heating is the best option for energy production when compared against the availability of fuel. National economy, social benefits, and safety, even if it is unreliable in terms of efficiency. Cyprus, 93% of residents use solar water. 93% of the residents use solar water. That one tells you they have recognized climate crisis, they have recognized climate change is real, and they have adopted to use clean energy. What will be your impact in ensuring that you play a big role in the climate crisis? Will you be on the side of the deniers? Will you be on the side of those who push the wheel of change? Another case study is in Brazil. They were able to turn 2 landfills or 2 dump sites into energy generating machines that could be able to recycle 15,000 tons of garbage per day. And remember, these landfills, or as you famously call them, dump sites, they generate or produce methane gas. But once you harness that energy from the dump site to produce energy, then the methane aspect is ruled out. Number 5, disaster risk plan. This plan examines how prepared the city is for disasters and improves early warning systems. Disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation have some overlaps. We need to have sensors that can monitor greenhouse gases from vehicles. You can see that from the picture. We need to have sensors that can monitor temperature rise within the cities. We need to have sensors that can monitor the wind pattern within the cities. All these are measures that we need so that we can climate proof our cities. Finally, we have entered into the question and answer session. You can pose your questions on the chat. And as you do that, I have a question for you. You can answer on the live chat. Examine the image. What measures would you take to mitigate urban greenhouse gas emissions? Please base your answers on what you can observe in the image. Look at the image. What can you implement as an urban planner into ensuring this town or city is climate proofed? The first one is include bicycle pathways. Does it have it? It doesn't have. So yes, A is one. 2, improve public transport. Yes, we need to improve public transport because you can see we have vehicles. These vehicles carry 1 occupant per car. And the emission per car is astonishing. Yes, we need to have a public transport, be it a railway transport that is organized or a bus transport that is organized. Number 3, we have relocate shops to dedicated areas outside the city center. This is true. When you have these small shops within the city center, then the traffic flow into and out of the city will have increased due to the customers and the demand of the goods they need from the cities. Number 4, use renewable energy sources. From the picture, I can see they don't have solar panels. There is no indication of green gardening on the roofs. Green gardening on the roofs is another way of climate proofing our cities. Through green gardening of our roofs and our buildings in cities, it helps to reduce the solar radiation, thereby helping to reduce the urban island heat effect. And that marks the end. I'm open to question and answers. But just to give you a brief summary of that, is that cities are the worst emitters. They are the worst emitters of greenhouse gases. 2/3 of the carbon emissions in the world come from cities. We need to be carbon neutral by 2030. And if that will not be the case, the shortcomings will be astonishing. So I'm waiting for questions on the chat room. I can see there's one there asking whether there's a future for change in terms of climate change. Yes, there is a solution. We have it. The scientists, the researchers, the policymakers, we need to work cohesion. Instead of working in silos and exchange ideas, we need to implement these policies. The Copenhagen treaties we signed, the COP26 is coming, we signed all these treaties. We need to implement this. Cities need to ensure they have green spaces, and countries need to make sure they have met the 10% forest cover that is supposed to be the minimum according to UN Habitat. And in reality, we cannot say that climate change is not real. It is real. Play your part. and make sure you become the voice of your city. Organize activist movements, press these governments to employ these kind of measures. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening to my podcast. Please subscribe to my channel for more of these kind of educative sessions. Go to my website at www.climatechangekenya.org for more information. Our Twitter handle is at climatekenya254. On Facebook, you'll find us at Climate Change Awareness Kenya. Please follow us, and I look to a more engaging session with you in the coming future. Thank you so much, and I've enjoyed the session. Goodbye.